My name is Dylan McDowell. I'm the Executive Director of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, or NCEL. We are a nationwide network of about 1,300 lawmakers, and we serve as a resource on all things environment. We don't lobby, but really it's about helping legislators connect with their peers in other states and connect with experts like many of you on this call at the national level, the state and community level to really work on environmental efforts. So today we're really excited to share with you the relaunch of the Youth Outdoor Policy Playbook. This is all part of the Youth Outdoor Policy Partnership, which NCEL is a very proud member of with three other organizations, which I'll introduce in just a moment here. So today we're going to walk through the updated playbook, and then we have a wonderful panel for you to hear about some of the work happening on the ground. The ultimate goal is to really help legislators and community leaders advance state policies and help get kids outside. So the playbook we've created, it highlights existing policy solutions, it celebrates and shares new ideas and innovation, and it connects leaders and communities across the country. And that last point is really key because what we want with the playbook is not only for you to come to this website, understand what's happening, best trends, but also for you to share ideas with us. We want this to be a two-way street where we're really highlighting community groups, community efforts, and you all can see your work highlighted across the national stage, and then others in different communities can learn from you as well. So we're really excited about that, and having the playbook on NCEL's website means it's integrated into our live bill tracking as well. Next slide, please. So the partnership is made up of 4 groups. We have the Children in Nature Network, the North American Association for Environmental Education, NCEL, and Nuestra Tierra. It's a really exciting group. I know many of you are coming with an affiliation to one of these 4 entities, some of you with other groups in the field. And our hope is to be as inclusive as possible and make sure we keep expanding the effort and providing a resource that benefits everyone in the field. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Grant Glinietsky, who is our Outdoor Policy Coordinator for NCEL, who's going to talk more about the website and some of the specific work happening. So Grant, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm Grant Glinietsky, the Outdoor Policy Coordinator for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. I'd like to offer a quick overview of what's happening in 2024 for state outdoor policy, to give a sense for why it mattered so much to put together a new resource to help make it easier to track and combine what's happening. In 2024, we've already seen 309 bills introduced. It's actually 312 bills as of this afternoon, introduced across 43 states and territories, and 34 of those bills have already become law or been enacted in 26 states and territories. We're seeing significant growth across access, equity, learning, especially outdoor learning, and health in outdoor policy. And here's a quick breakdown of what we're looking at this year. One of the largest growth areas we're seeing in both 2023 and continuing in 2024 is that education and learning are growing. That ranges from both climate education mandates to environmental education to integrating learning in state parks. We're seeing governance grow. So those are things like whether or not there's an Office of Outdoor Recreation to help expand access and opportunity, to help direct and offer guidance to state resources. But the largest category, and continues to be the largest and biggest growing category, is access and equity. States are looking really hard at how to build opportunities for people to meaningfully spend time outside, especially kids to spend time outside. As a couple examples of those bills, because there are 300 to talk about and there are 34 enacted to talk about, I'll just highlight a couple examples in each category. Maryland House Bill 420 requires that all newly built public playgrounds include a communication board. A communication board is a water-resistant outdoor installation of pictures or illustrations that children can point to communicate with one another, regardless of ability or shared languages. Virginia House Bill 1186 as a 2-year pilot program that will install all-terrain wheelchairs and modify paths in order to accommodate them in, I believe, 6 state parks. It'll be done with a diverse community organization's feedback, as well as led by disabled users to determine what the best policy would be to expand that to an overall policy available across the state. In environmental and outdoor education, we saw Puerto Rico pass Senate Resolution 854. It's a climate resilience and technology bill that requires that mandatory curriculum include climate economics, climate social strategies, and other forms of adaptation and mitigation available to youth, with a particular focus on helping youth restore a sense of hope for the future, as well as their own agency in their own communities. New Mexico House Memorandum 34, as well as a companion Senate memorandum, is establishing a commission for citizen science between state agencies to determine ways that state agencies could benefit from quality citizen science that engages the public, especially youth, in the process of creating new knowledge about the government and the state that people live in. Lastly, I'll very quickly cover outdoor governance and recreation. Again, there are only 2 examples of each out of very many. New Mexico House Bill 303 establishes a TANF workforce pilot program to include outdoor jobs. TANF is temporary assistance for needy families. It is federal funding that is directed to states, and states can spend that in ways that promote access to meaningful quality employment. That bill recognizes for the first time outdoor jobs, such as being a tour leader or outfitter, as quality jobs in the workforce pilot program. And lastly, Wyoming House Bill 67 implements and makes it possible to administer a $6 million trust fund developed in 2023 for the outdoor recreation and tourism industry and programs in Wyoming. But those are just a handful of a lot of what's going on. So you can sort of see why we wanted a website that would better reflect and help it be easier to navigate those things. You can see our new website at youthoutdoorpolicy.org. And on this first page, our homepage, it explains what each of these sections that I'm going to show you are about, just to sort of give you a little lay of the land before we get into it. On our About page, you can learn about the playbook as well as about the partnership. The playbook, as Dylan mentioned, is where we share proven policies that have been successful examples from across the United States, as well as innovative ideas. So those range from things that were introduced but didn't quite pass, to novel ideas from scientists and advocates, to things that lawmakers are considering, as well as some small success stories that we'll be sharing in our resource center and community spotlights. And lastly, we aim to promote and continue to build a collaborative network. We want to connect leaders, experts, and advocates across communities, across organizations, across focuses, to all that are all focused on some degree of youth outdoor policy, youth outdoor access, to get together and silo bust those. We're as Dylan mentioned, a group of 4 organizations. You can find out a little bit more about us. You can see my chicken Nutter Butter in my photo. I have 3 chickens. Under our policy library, we have policy areas, bill tracking, and a resource center. Policy areas show the issues and solutions that we cover. So all of these tend to overlap with each other, especially outdoor equity and justice tends to be embedded in all of what we do. But our categories are roughly broken down into 4. We have outdoor equity and justice, where we consider funds and scholarships. We consider removing barriers and building bridges, and transportation especially. Outdoor and environmental learning, we consider early childhood education, climate and environmental education, and all of these have examples of policies that have been successful. Time outdoors in schools and green schools and living schoolyards. We also look at outdoor health and well-being. This is a new category for our website, inspired by the fact that nearly 60% of youth are so worried about climate change that it impacts their daily lives, but that spending time outdoors reduces fear and anxiety, and it also can mitigate other climate-related hazards for physical health. But we look at outdoor mental health and well-being programs, healthy childhood initiatives, and outdoor safety and environmental health. This is also an equity and justice issue, because often whether or not it's safe to spend time outside and the kinds of activities that you have exposure to safely do outside depend on who you are and where you live. Lastly, we look at outdoor neighborhoods and play. So this ranges from everything to looking at housing developments and whether or not they offer green space, to creating and protecting public green space, making it easier to access spaces closer to home, as well as making those spaces meaningful and exciting. Often the time that youth spend outdoors is made meaningful by their parents' exposure more than anything. So we really encourage programs that help families and children spend time outdoors, even if they don't have a linear family connection to those spaces. One of the things I'm most excited about is our new bill tracking page that allows you to look at bills across the country, including in your state. So we have 2 different maps you can look at. This first one is embedded on this page, and you can sort by your state. So for example, I live in Michigan. So if I want to see what's happening in Michigan, I can click on my state, and I can see everything that's been happening. I can see the status of the bill, as well as all of them will be listed as bill type outdoor engagement, but sometimes they also include categories like biodiversity or climate and energy if you're excited about that. And it'll also offer a very brief description of what type of bill it is. Bill description could be recreation, trails, outdoor governance, outdoor access and equity, funding, or environmental education and outdoor learning. If you want to sort by those categories, you can scroll up to our second map. And that'll allow you to filter. You can filter by, for example, environmental education and outdoor learning. And if you want to see only the ones that have been enacted, you can go over to status and click sort, and you can scroll down, or you can click filter and select just enacted. There's lots of different things to play around with here. I won't get too far into it, but just as a reminder, it's under this link. Follow this link. Lastly, under Policy Library, we have a resource center to try and tie all of this together. So we've distilled all the findings that we have scientifically on what we know about what research says about getting youth outdoors. We know it promotes physical and mental health. We know it supports children's happiness. We know it boosts learning and academic achievement, as well as potential economic achievement. And we also know that kids who spend time outdoors learn to care for the environment. We connect you to research libraries. These are the libraries we recommend because they offer summaries and easy-to-use search and filter tools. These are also our libraries, but if you have resources you would recommend, feel free to share them with us. And lastly, on this page, we have case studies. These are in-depth examples that provide information on how it came about, who was involved, and what happened with these bills, what the eventual outcomes were. But that's a lot. I know that's a lot. So if you just want the distilled version of everything that happened in the year, we've got you. We have annual trend reports that we put out every year. Our 2023 trend report covers a wide swath of issue, but it breaks them down across categories, and it shows the newest, most novel things that just happened. I recommend looking through past years as well, because they'll also offer what happened and what was novel in those years. There's been a lot happening in outdoor policy just in the past couple of years, but I welcome and recommend you check those out. And lastly, the section I'm most excited about are our community spotlights. These are where we'll have the opportunity to celebrate leaders and organizations that are changing the game in youth outdoor policy. It'll be an opportunity to discover and tell the stories of how people changed out state policy to get more kids outside. That was inspired by seeing the success of coalitions and wanting to show and share the stories around how they happened. And also because state policy can be a little bit slower, especially if you're a kid. Something taking 2 to 5 years is a very long time in a youth or child's life. So we wanted to show some successes to remind you and inspire ourselves at the same time of what's been happening and what can happen. So we launched with the Grow Greater Englewood Coalition, a feature about Illinois Representative Sonia Harper. She started as a youth leader at just 16, and has spent the rest of her life since then building on her successes as a nonprofit leader, eventually joining the House of Representatives in 2015, where she's continued those relationships. And her work continuing to build and maintain coalitions and partnerships with nonprofits has been the basis of her work. We also have the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance, which is, we can find out hear about a little bit more later, that created a guidance for equitable pay and hiring in environmental education. And this report offers pretty key recommendations and highlights on best practices for environmental and outdoor education organizations that would help make the field more diverse, welcoming, and sustainable. With that, I know I just threw a lot at you. I would love to hand it over to David Beard to introduce our panelists, and I will stop sharing. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Grant. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's afternoon across most of the country. David Beard with the Children in Nature Network, and we are a national organization that supports children's access to nature through a variety of strategies, and excited to be here today. I'm the Director of Policy and Government Affairs, right now engaged at multiple levels of government, which is really exciting. One thing to note, we will have a Q&A right after the panel. So any questions you have about the website, in addition to any questions for any of us, including our guests today, we will have time for that as well. So with that, I want to get us started. We wanted to profile just some burgeoning, amazing work that's happening in the country. And we zeroed on Kentucky, who's doing some really cool work right now with early childhood. And as we know, it's never too early to engage kids in the outdoors and in nature and learning from nature. And Kentucky right now has a bill in the legislature, House Bill 423, which relates to outdoor nature-based childcare licensing, as well as some other elements related to QRIS and subsidy. So I think we'll get into a little bit about the policy details today, as well as how did this come together? You know, what does this kind of work look like in maybe a state that leans a little more conservative, and also a state from the southeast Midwest. I think it depends on where you're at in Kentucky, whether you consider yourself a part of the southeast or the Midwest. So, but let me introduce our esteemed guests today. So first we have State Representative Josie Raymond, who is in her third term in the Kentucky House, and will be moving to the Louisville Metro Council. So we'll be entering local government here pretty soon. Dedicated to a career in creating opportunities for Kentuckians in poverty with a focus on pathways in education. She's the first representative to give birth in office and has continually advocated for policies that support families, including paid leave, early childhood education, and expanding maternal health. This is in addition to founding a citywide advocacy coalition for universal pre-K in Louisville. She's also a nonprofit consultant helping building pathways to partnership and capacity building for community partners. And she is also a graduate of Columbia University, both for undergrad and the Graduate School of Journalism. So we welcome Representative Raymond, and also want to welcome Ashley Hoffman, who is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Association for Environmental Education. And that organization is an affiliate of the North American Association for Environmental Education, and is a member of the NAAE's network working group, as well as the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance, or SEEA. She holds a degree in wildlife and conservation, and a master's in nonprofit administration. And in her free time, enjoys traveling to new places and enjoying time in the outdoors with her family. So please welcome our guests, Ashley and Representative Raymond. Welcome.
Thanks so much.
Well, I have a few questions for you that we'll kick off with. But again, we'll have time for Q&A. But if you have questions as we're going along, go ahead and feel free to anybody on the call today to type that into the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that as well. So why don't we kick off, and maybe Rep. Raymond, if you want to start, what and how did you get involved with sort of outdoor learning and engagement?
Yeah, thank you for having us today. Coming at you from the southeast in Kentucky, right, Ashley? Yeah. So you said burgeoning work. Burgeoning is right. This was the first session that we introduced this legislation and this concept, and so we just adjourned, and we were not successful in passing this bill. But as many of you all know, it takes a few years strategizing and spreading the word about something before we're successful. So I came at it from the childcare perspective. So I'm a mom of young kids, represent lots of people who've been dealing with the childcare crisis, both in terms of affordability and accessibility. And so in the legislature was looking for ways to expand access for families. Democrats like myself wanted to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. Republicans, who have the supermajority here in Kentucky, so it's a little more than a lean red area, said, how could we increase access how could we find flexibility in existing systems? And so that was really my challenge. And I also represent this incredible place called the Louisville Nature Center. And they have an incredible school program called Swallowtail Forest School. And so I had this thought, how could we grow that program? Went to them with the idea, of course, nothing about us without us. And they directed me to Ashley, right? So it was really that focus on childcare that brought me to outdoor education and seeing where those intersect and what the beauty is. I'll pause there for Ashley, and then we can go into what we proposed.
Thanks, Josie. So I am the director of the Kentucky Association for Environmental Ed. But also the part of my time is spent as the director of the Southeast Environmental Ed Alliance. And so some of our work, Grant showed you our equitable pay and hiring guidance that we released last year. And that came out of a big effort we did around this landscape analysis we've been working on for the past few years, which was really designed to better understand the gaps and barriers that we've been facing in our field. And so we did this big survey of environmental education providers as well as schools. And one of the things that we found, in addition to things like the lack of equitable pay and hiring practices, was that there was a huge issue with nature preschool licensing. We did a listening tour around the state of Kentucky, and that was just something that came up again and again for our early childhood folks, was that, and it's a huge equity issue, is that, you know, the students that have, so the nature preschools can't get licensed because it's based on a brick and mortar school, because this idea of doing school outdoors is, it's not new, but it's new to us because it's something that kind of got lost in our history. And so anyway, we were really interested in how could we address this equity issue so that all students could have access in early childhood to these nature-based preschools, and they could get, you know, state funding and support, and also be licensed so that students could go all day, so that it was open to all students, not just the students who had part-time parents at home, that kind of thing. And so that's really what brought us into this. And I had reached out to Sarah Boder with NAAEE and asked her, and this is really new for us. And so she was able to connect us with Grant at NCEL. And I guess it just kind of snowballed from there. And we were really excited to connect with NCEL and start thinking about raising awareness at the Capitol. And then Representative Raymond and I connected, and all of a sudden we had a bill introduced, which was really exciting. So
That's great. And yes, we do have lots of acronyms. So how is the advocacy strategies, you know, and the sort of coalition building? Are you forming a coalition? You know, how has that kind of gotten lifted off to get to a point where you're both at the bill and then actually being able to go to the Hill to advocate for it?
yeah, so one of the things that we started doing was connecting with all the early childhood folks in our state, and we have launched an early childhood coalition. So one of the first things we did was just pull them all together on a call and say, hey, this is what we've been hearing from you all during our listening tour, during this landscape analysis, and this is what we'd like to tackle. We would really like to tackle this licensing. Is that something that you're interested in working with us on? And it was a resounding yes, and there was so much excitement. And from there we've just had more people joining. And so I would say getting a coalition going was probably the easy part of this whole process, because there's been a lot of interest. We've also been able to connect with the Natural Start Alliance, who has a huge network, and Kit Harrington, they've been doing a lot of work on this to help different states, because there's a lot of states that are trying to tackle this nationwide. And so we've been able to learn a lot from them in this process, so that we weren't really going at this blindly. We're learning from what's worked in other states and what have been the challenges in other states and things like that. So I'd say we had that coalition at the state level, but we've also benefited from some of those coalitions that are already existing at the national level as well.
I just wanted to point out that some other states are probably going to laugh at us, but Ashley, how many nature-based preschools do we have in Kentucky?
We don't have very many. We have like less than 10, like
Right. Right. So,
Uh,
but huge opportunity for growth, right? The demand is there, the interest is there. And so part of this bill, right, House Bill 423, in seeking to expand access, what it would really do is welcome nature-based preschools, outdoor preschools. And of course, we've fooled with language, because when people use different terms, in the field or across the country, it means different things to different people, but it would really welcome them into our state licensing system. And as Ashley mentioned, there would have to be some carve outs, because right now our licensing says, you know, there has to be a sink in every room. And not only are there not sinks outside, there's not rooms. And so we were like, what are these carve outs? And so it was me going to my local nature center who connected me to Ashley, Ashley saying, look at Washington, who has done this successfully, me taking it to my bill drafters in Frankfurt at the Capitol saying, look at this statute from Washington. So it was this really roundabout way that made us feel like we're using best practices, right? Because we have all these voices and we've seen what's successful. Right now, the families who are able to utilize nature-based preschools in Kentucky are privileged families because, as Ashley said, they're generally half-day programs, and so you have a parent who can come and pick up in the middle of the day, and they're also pretty expensive because we know that the cost of quality is really very high, right? And most of that money goes to staffing, and we want, sustainability educators to be these teachers. And so by welcoming them into our state's licensing system, what that will do for our nature-based preschools in Kentucky is allow them to offer a full day program, which we think is going to appeal to a lot more families, make it more accessible, and then also make them eligible for our state's subsidy program, our child care assistance program, which provides subsidies for daycare or childcare. And so these are huge efforts to invite new types of families into these wonderful spaces. And then something really, really important in the bill that I wanted to point out that as I hand the bill off in future years, I'll make sure stays. It says that our cabinet that regulates childcare centers will learn as they're developing regulations, they will learn from state and national organizations with expertise in this area. Because with fewer than 10 nature-based preschools in Kentucky, we're not the hub of expertise in this field. And so it's many of the people on this call that I think will be consulted when we finally are successful in passing this bill. But I think that's just really, really important to say, we're going to use best practices. We're going to go to experts in the field.
I have two follow-ups. One is the bill also includes school-age childcare as well. Is that correct? Which would allow for your after-school, before-school programs to also be nature-based.
That's something that at least my Louisville Nature Center said, we'd love to be an out of school time provider, but the regulations right now don't permit us to. And so we're trying to create those carve outs for them as well.
That's great. And then Rep. Raymond, what are you hearing from your colleagues right now on the bill or the chair? Are you getting any feedback yet?
So like many state legislatures, right, we're facing a childcare cliff because the federal funds are running out as we speak. And so really, I believe that our legislature was derelict this session in not addressing the issue. There was not consensus. There was not a bipartisan compromise, and so nothing was done. And so what we're going to see is many centers close and many families see their tuition skyrocket. Mine just went up 8% at the YMCA. So we know that families are going to feel this pain. Of course, our legislatures are reactive bodies. So, unfortunately, that pain is going to have to hit some Kentucky families before we act on it. I do think this sort of measure is appealing to my Republican colleagues because it's that sort of cutting red tape mentality. We saw them looking for ways to cut red tape in childcare, and those of us in the early childhood space said, whoa, don't adjust our ratios. That makes it less safe for kids. Here's a way you could cut some red tape. Some of these regulations around outdoor spaces. And so I'm hopeful in the longer term, but ultimately our legislature chose to do nothing this session.
Yeah, and as you said, these things often take three years. What is it? I think Grant says 3 to 5 years, to pass something in a legislature, which is true. But you all started with a bang. And Ashley, maybe one last question before we go in. And again, type your questions either in chat or in Q&A, and we'll get to those in just a second. But how have families shown up or provided input, or or how are you all thinking about that in advocacy moving forward?
That's a great question. This is all fairly new, so we have a lot of room for growth and things in our advocacy work, I think. But we haven't, I wouldn't say we've worked with families directly. We've mostly been working with the nature preschools and the educators themselves. We did co-host with Grant and NCEL outdoor reception at the Capitol last month, which was really great. And we had some students there. So it was really exciting to see some students come out and learn from that opportunity. And I think there's a lot more opportunity to do more of that and engage them more in the future.
I'll just share an anecdote from the Swallowtail Forest School, and I'm dropping the link in the chat for cuteness. But the families who are choosing this option right now, where I live in the Democratic city of Louisville, they love that this option is available to them. They want racial and socioeconomic diversity in their children's classes, but because of the structure right now, they're not able to get it. So in my community, they're saying, we want more families here. We want more types of children to be able to access this.
Absolutely. One reason why I bring up families is they can also be very exceptional advocates. And I actually was intentionally involved when the bill passed here, and then I was on the work in Washington State where I live, and then was on the work group to get it implemented and with a focus on school age care. But I think one of the main things that really got it passed was the family saying, we want this option, we need more option. There's mental health benefits for our kids outside. And mind you, we live in a in parts of our state, very cold state, certain times of the year. And even then we still had families coming out, so they can be really effective advocates. And then as we think as K-12 policy, of course, including youth voice in the bill development and in the advocacy, as well as in implementation, is also really critical. And of course, for our younger learners, really having that family voice there. So that's great.
Yeah, I think we have this all happened so quickly this year, and so I think as far as coalition building, we have a lot. I think we will be much more prepared when we reintroduce this next year, and hopefully have a much stronger coalition and do a better job of engaging all of the different constituents who can help push this through to the finish line. So
there's so much education to be done. I said there's so few, and they're in our urban areas right now. And so, David, the first question that I always get when I describe it is like, all the time? They're outside all the time? And so, we're still, if there was an arc, right, of bill passage, we're still in that early, like, civic education piece.
Well, and there's, of course, this doesn't always fly in all legislators, but there are a few other countries actually where they do have programs where kids are outside all the time. And Finland is one of those where you have early learners in Finland outside all the time. So I think we can do that in most of the United States, right? Well, let's look at some questions here from the audience. Kendall, we may have a response to you directly from somebody who's really involved in this. So we're going to see if we can, who's on the call. So we're going to see if we can get them up in just a second. So I'm going to go to Tracy's comment. Will future bills possibly allow funding support for state-funded pre-K? So the child care subsidy is what the bill is really focused on, but in a state-funded pre-K program, is that also a possibility, or is that also in what you're thinking? And either Ashley or Josie, whoever wants to answer that.
It's a great question. Whoever asked it is touching the third rail of Kentucky politics, of preschool versus pre-K in a mixed delivery setting, right? And our governor, who's a Democratic governor in a southern state, has been promoting public school preschool in particular, which is funded with a block grant, whereas our childcare subsidies are through our Cabinet for Health and Family Services. And so there's this real divide. I mean, I was going to speak to the language too. It's tough when we're not all speaking the same language of preschool versus pre-K versus childcare versus child welfare. And so, we worked with Grant a little bit in planning for this bill of what language is going to land best, or best convey what we're trying to do. And so we're still trying to hit that. I right now it feels that the public preschool and our private childcare options are still far apart for us.
So for this first question, we're trying to see if we can unmute Sarah Boder from the North American Association of Environmental Education, NAAE. But Ashley, I think, can, as a part of the network, maybe you could take a stab at that question around equitable pay and hiring. So I'm assuming this is about the federal directive around childcare employees. Or am I reading that?
I may be wrong, but I think she was, well, Sarah, go ahead and chat if you want to unmute. I think she was referring to our EE guidance for equitable pay and hiring that Sia put together.
Yes, so the question was, with the guide to equitable pay and hiring in EE, environmental education, have you had any feedback from orgs striving to use this guidance on where the struggles for implementation are?
I'll do my best. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
So, I mean, a couple of challenges. First, I would like to say that the team that wrote this EE guidance document did a great job, and it's been really well received. I think Ashley would agree that there's just been a lot of interest in the guide. Sometimes I think that there is a very fundamental structural challenge, which is getting that guidance into the hands of the folks who actually have the power to make changes. So you can imagine that a lot of educators are really enthusiastic about the recommendations in the guidance, but they might not necessarily be in a position within their organizations to make decisions about pay and hiring practices. I think that the way that some of our affiliates have been trying to disseminate the guidance through workshops has been intentionally designed in a way to really meet folks where they are and recognize that this is a long-term process that has to take place, and that multiple sectors need to be involved in the conversation. Many of our small nonprofit education organizations are being funded by private funders that need to understand the need for pay equity and be willing to provide, higher levels of funding to support that. We know that this isn't going to turn around overnight, and we don't want organizations to come into these recommendations feeling sort of embarrassed or ashamed. But we do want folks to recognize that many of us who began our careers in environmental and outdoor education had circumstances that allowed us to work for a lower level of pay than many emerging professionals might have in their favor. And so I guess I don't know if I'm really doing a good job of addressing the specific challenges, but I just would emphasize that the guidance is really meant to provide folks with some sort of basic early steps that you can take, and then some recommendations around what are the most aspirational practices that we can strive towards putting in place, so that we're not just offering a living wage, but we're actually offering a thriving wage, ideally, in this field. But we know it's going to take time, and we know that those messages need to get out to a lot of actors in the system.
Yeah, and I would just add that, a lot of the feedback that I've received as we launched this guidance, and I did share the link in the chat, and we have a number of organizations who have endorsed this nationally. So if you're interested in trying to implement this within your organization, you can check that out, and you're welcome to endorse as well. But I think the biggest barrier we've heard from our EE providers is just, how do we address this when our funders, we have a lot of funders who don't see the value of funding overhead or funding staff and things like that. And so we have had a lot of difficult conversations about, like, yes, we have this guidance, and yes, we realize that we all need to change the way we're paying our staff, and we need to do better, but we're also limited by those above us. And so one of the things we did with Sia was we worked in partnership with Blue Sky Funders Forum, and we hosted a funders briefing for funders in the Southeast, and we were able to share with them a lot of the findings of our landscape analysis, but with a particular emphasis on the role that they can play in helping us address equitable pay and hiring by helping us fund staff at competitive wages, and in ways that we can offer healthcare and benefits and all the things that people need to live and survive above poverty level. And so we realized that this guidance is not an easy thing to just flip the switch and suddenly we've addressed this issue. And we realize that it's not just the EE providers that need to change. It's the funders, it's the people that are in the power positions to help us make these things happen. So we're raising awareness, but we know we have a lot more work to do. So.
Thank you. What other questions do folks have? And if you'd put questions in chat or in Q&A. So one of the questions that was sort of raised a few minutes ago is what about older kids? And so I do want to welcome, while we're sort of focused on childcare and outdoor nature-based early childhood, there's obviously issues all across the age span. And so maybe this is a good time. Also, what other questions do you have about the website itself, the YAP website, or other things that are happening out there in environmental policy? And one of the questions that came up was, outdoor learning and engagement for middle schoolers or high schoolers, and what kind of work is being done there. So I definitely want to have the floor open to anybody that wants to talk about some of those other efforts that might be happening, maybe in professional development or in youth development, as well as related to the school day. So I don't know if Ashley or Rep. Raymond, if there's anything happening there in Kentucky, or if Dylan wants to jump in here for other ideas while we're waiting for some more questions to come in.
That's a great question. We have a number of policies. We've put together kind of a list of policy initiatives that we'd like to see happen in Kentucky I mentioned earlier that we co-hosted an outdoor reception with NCEL last month at the Capitol. And one of the things we put together was like a one-pager that we handed out to the folks that came by about different policies that we'd like to see. And so I wouldn't say we've made a lot of headway or anything, but we've definitely identified some things that we'd like to see. One of those is around green schools, funding the green schools initiatives at schools. I'm trying to remember what some of our things were, but we have a lot of work still to do in policy. So I don't have any great examples to share yet, but
I make sure you give yourself some credit there, because I know you also worked on running that by the coalition. So you're a little bit further ahead of the curve than I think you think you are. Some of the other things that you identified with your coalition were the idea of outdoor school for all programs. Washington has the No Child Left Inside program. Maine has a similar outdoor learning grant program. And Georgia had an outdoor learning committee established that created an outdoor learning grant program that I think would be exciting to replicate, especially considering that it would benefit primarily rural, small, and low-income communities. You also identified that outdoor education in curriculum could be a strong fit for Kentucky, especially since New Hampshire, New Jersey, and New Mexico all create opportunities in state curriculum already. And Georgia has explored for a couple of years now an outdoor education pilot program. So Georgia's a little bit further south and a little bit further east, but a fairly similar political situation, and especially childcare situation. I think give yourself some credit for having some cool ideas to share.
thank you.
Thanks, Grant. And it looks like we have in Colorado a bill around a seal of climate literacy that would be on the high school diploma, an endorsement, which is really cool. Also, I know, Grant, you've been working and following what's happening in Puerto Rico, and some exciting advancements there with education around climate change and environmental literacy as well. Is there anything you want to share in regards to what's happening down in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned it very briefly in the State of the State, but Puerto Rico recently enacted RS 854, which integrates climate science, technology, and justice as required curriculum for all ages and grade levels. So it directs the Department of Education to provide students with scientific and practical knowledge to understand climate issues and the solutions available. It started actually as a legislative petition from a youth leader, Salvador Gomez Camolon, and it reflects global calls from youth leaders. It was inspired by New Jersey and Connecticut bills, both that centered climate education. And it builds on a 2018 bill that Puerto Rico already enacted that requires climate education as part of state curriculum. So I think the exciting thing for me is both the focus on youth empowerment and agency, as well as that it is the first of its kind in the United States to explicitly center social, economic, and technological solutions for climate adaptation and resilience. Especially the justice angle is, from a solutions perspective, is the first of its kind.
And it is quite comprehensive. So another question, so how can businesses like REI and others in the outdoor recreation industry, or quite frankly, any business that might be interested in this might be a good one for Ashley and Rep Raymond, you know, if you could engage any businesses to be a part of what you're trying to do there, how might you do that? And what is your experience in this sort of child and youth focused advocacy with business? Or if you could wish for anything, what would that be?
Well, Ashley, thanks. I'll say that so our state division of childcare used federal funds to incentivize companies large and small to create on-site childcare centers. You know, one of my worries with that was, you know, I don't think it's a great idea that our healthcare is tied so closely to our employment, and I worried about tying our childcare so closely to our employment. But there's ways of, you know, guaranteeing a phase out if a parent loses a job or something like that. But we didn't have many takers actually for a matching grant program at the state level, but how powerful would it be if we could incentivize our employers to create outdoor, nature-based childcare, you know, which I'm sure was not even on the radar. So it goes back to the education piece. We're not just educating voters about what we're proposing, but we need to educate the stakeholders.
I just was at a panel this morning with that PNC was putting on, and it was all about the work that they've done to focus on early childhood. And it was just great to see as a business, you know, industry, they talked about how they had, you know, they used to work in like 12 different markets with their grants program, and then they really decided to hone in on this one area and focus their expertise. And then they talked a lot about the you know, just the return on investment and how much education had to happen on their end to be aware of the impact that that funding could have, and the value of outdoor recreation and outdoor play. And so I think that I was really inspired to see so many folks from the business sector there at that meeting this morning, and that there was so much interest in outdoor education, outdoor recreation, outdoor play, because I feel like that's a fairly new thing to see so much support for that. And so I guess I think continuing to raise awareness and educate you know, different sectors on the importance of this work, and the value of you know, outdoor learning and outdoor play is so important. And so any way that we can work in partnership with businesses to do that, I think can really help move this forward quicker than if we were just doing it through one sector.
Exactly. And the business we do have, like with REI and some other national organizations that are sort of showing how businesses can really play a role in advancing outdoor nature-based youth engagement. So I'm sure they're also willing to talk for any of you that have some efforts out there going on, you know, happy to figure out how to connect you to some of those folks, or just building your own relationships with the outdoor recreation industry, because obviously they have a vested interest. But you know, many of them were kids that also love to be in the outdoors, and so they also often have personal interests as well. So that's great. And another thing that I'll say on green schoolyards, you know, which is really about the infrastructure of a school, making sure that it is conducive to environmental learning, and in the best cases also is sustainable and has like school forests to help with the heat challenges that we have around the country, to use sustainable materials in the school building, to have stormwater management that is better for the environment and stops the headaches of many school facilities. We actually, I believe it will be officially released. I think it's officially out now. We're gonna have a big release next week for a return on investment report that Rob Grunwald from formerly of the Minnesota Reserve Bank, that has what is the return on investment for green schoolyards. And it's actually really interesting to see all the different ways that green schoolyards really give back, in a sense, money to schools to use for the kids by actually doing things more efficiently in addition to more sustainably. So check that out. Let's see if we have any other questions. Oh, thank you, Amelia. It is out. Hot off the press.
I also just saw a mention in the chat that the Georgia efforts are, in fact, they are an NAAE affiliate, the North American Association of Environmental Education. The gold grants, the Georgia Outdoor Learning Demonstration grants that were championed by the Outdoor Learning Committee, passed by Senator Rahman. That was championed by the Environmental Education Alliance of Georgia. They had a second year allocated for funding. They were not unfortunately funded for this year, but I will post in the chat an example of their 2023-2024 gold grants.
Holding to see if there's any more questions.
There's one hand raised. Is that?
I've messaged them to get the question.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple of people here. If you could put your questions in chat, that would be great. Well, with that, maybe we will, if you have any questions here in the last few minutes of the call, why don't you go ahead and put it in chat? I think I'm throwing it back to our Incel team to kind of give a few more updates, and then we'll close out.
I'm actually going to pass it right back to you. I want to point out that the Children in Nature Networks conference is coming up in May, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So our conference is in Madison, Wisconsin this year. It's a great conference that tackles everything from, what are the learning techniques happening out there in environmental related programs, to what's happening in green schoolyards and nature-based early childhood editions, to some policy and systems work. So there's all kind of great things that are happening at this conference. And thanks for putting the link in there, Amelia. We hope to see you all in Madison.
Oh, and I don't know if Sarah, if you want to hop off mute and tell us about the Natural Start Alliance conference coming up this July and August.
Sure, we're very excited to be having an in-person conference. This is our nature-based early childhood education conference. It will be in Portland, Oregon. You can see there July 31st through August 3rd. And we hope that you'll consider joining us and submitting, the call for proposals has ended, but please come to the conference. It's a really wonderful gathering of folks who work in the nature-based early childhood education space.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone so much for joining us. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at grant@ncelenviro.org. We hope you'll explore our website, youthoutdoorpolicy.org, and find some great resources there. If we missed anything, if you want to add anything, feel free to reach out.